I really admire teachers in this day and age. The real ones, you know what I mean? The ones who are actually trying to, uh, you know, help the next generation uh,
Mhm.
learn the real truths and learn what, not no sideshows or anything like that. I mean, you work with small kids, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you, when you teach them, I mean, obviously you have a curriculum and stuff like that that you have to follow, but I mean, this may be a stupid question. I mean, do you worry about these kids? Like, seriously worry about their futures?
All the time. All the time. Like, climate change, like, that was just one thing that I thought about, like, maybe about a month ago. I remember thinking about that because I think, the idea of climate change was kind of big in the news at the time, and I was just kinda like, "What are these kids gonna have to go through by the time they're my age?" You know? Like, and the other thing was that I kind of thought about is how are we preparing them to meet that challenge? And I don't think, like, in education we're necessarily talking about that. We're not talking about the idea of, like, these are issues that these students, well, like, I guess for me, the generation alpha at this point, but
Yeah.
like, um they need the skills to combat this, especially given our politicians aren't really doing anything. And so, like, on one hand, I think especially for young kids, like, and I enjoy teaching young kids. I mean, it's not for everybody, like, I tell my colleagues, like, I find it easy to teach young kids. I can't do older ones. Like, fuck middle schoolers. No, I can't do that. I remember when I was in middle school, I'm like, I wouldn't want to teach myself when I was 13, 14. Like, no way.
Well, I mean, what
You
could you
know,
teach yourself at 13 and 14? I know what you're saying, but I'm just thinking
yeah,
of you as a 13 or
I
14
just
year old
remember
trying to
being in
teach
middle
yourself.
school, just being like, starting to come into my own and just being like, I was just a dick, But I think also, like, at that time, like, my friends, like, relationships with my friends started changing, and it was just kind of an awkward and a weird time. I mean, I loved where I went to school, but at the same time, it kind of sucked too, So, um, but yeah, but I think in terms of, like, for little kids, because they're not jaded to learning, they're not jaded to the world yet. And so for
Yeah.
me, it's like, on one hand, I enjoy that because it's like, for me, as I don't even really call myself a teacher per se, I'm more of a facilitator, because for me, it's the idea of, like, I learn with the kids oftentimes, especially with the curriculum. Because the thing is with my curriculum, I don't really have a curriculum in the traditional sense. My curriculum is based on what they tell me that they want to learn. Like, funny enough, how that works.
Hmm.
Like, they essentially tell me what's of value to them, and I tailor the curriculum around what they want to know about. Like, kind of a foreign concept, I think, for many of us. But I feel like if all teachers, depending on the age, if you're able to teach that way, how much more of a buy-in do you have with students who enjoys being in school? Because, you're essentially teaching them or honoring them as far as, having that advocacy for themselves, but then, like, having the idea of, like, valuing them in that way, that you care about what they know versus what we want them to know as
Hmm.
adults. And so for me, it's like having that enjoyment of being around my 19 little ones and just being able to listen to what they say and tell me and tell each other, and just really grow in the process of learning with them how they process the world and how, in my way, I can help them navigate that. But then on the other hand, it's kind of like I worry for them, because it's like, we don't know what's going to happen within the next 50 years. And they have to deal with that. I mean, for us, we'll be long gone,
Yeah.
probably. But, like, But for them, it's like they have to deal with the fuckery that we're kind of perpetuating right now. So I worry about that all the time. And I don't think we're really preparing them for those challenges either. So, that's kind of the point of frustration that I have, especially with our education system just in general, is that we don't teach them to really meet the challenges of, the problems that exist in this society. We are essentially indoctrinating them to essentially do work in the name of capitalism.
Yeah.
You're just a robot. You're designed to do this and
Hmm.
nothing more. Now, if you are privileged, you probably will do a little better.
Yeah.
But in terms of you being in the working class, you're basically a cog in the system.
Yeah.
And
Same as it
and
ever
that's the
was, you know?
yeah.
It
And that's the kind of frustration that I have, being in this field. I love it, but I also understand, just given where I'm at, that I'm privileged to teach the children in a way that I can teach them, you know?
right.
And my students are not necessarily the ones that I think necessarily need it in that way. Like, because I work in an affluent part of DC where they, for the most part, most of those kids, no matter what happens, they will be okay. But for children who look like me, may not necessarily be. And
Right.
so, those are the things that often I think about, especially since I'm very aware of that privilege, and having to kind of navigate that, has been, I think, especially since moving to DC, has been very interesting. And I mean, I've had some great conversations with people about it, since being here. But at the same time, it's like, especially given the pandemic, you would think that that would actually be like a catalyst for change, especially in education. And, right now it's like, nah, we're just going to go back to how things were. And you're going to do a lot more of it, um, because we need to catch them up to where they should be. And it's kind of like, no, like, the issues that are in education existed then, and it's just been exacerbated now. And like, this is the time to really rethink education in terms of like, what are we teaching our kids for? And
Yeah.
I don't think we're having enough of those conversations, which
Kelly
is,
Kelly in the chat has a question. She says, "What is the most difficult thing you face in your job right now?"
oh wow. Um,
That you can tell us on
I
a
yeah,
podcast.
yeah. No, I can. um, like last year I wanted to quit. Last year I was just mentally in a very fragile state, to the point where basically it was like having to force myself to get up and, you know, and somewhat try to get myself together to give the appearance of, okay, I'm ready to teach these kids, was a very trying thing for me. Um, but I think more specifically, what's tough right now is there's a lot of things, but I think the biggest thing right now is, you know, I, I think teachers are not respected, you know? The idea of like, I think people take teachers for granted, in terms of like, y- which it's expected in a sense, because obviously dealing with parents, you're dealing with their kids. And so I consider my job to be a partnership with parents. Is ultimately what's going to happen. Like I always say, the parents are the child's first teacher, and they will have me for a year, but they're going to have their parents, you know, essentially, for the rest of their lives, you know, but it's the idea of like having to work with families, but then the families kind of saying, to me, like, which it kind of gets like, lost in the sauce in a sense, especially when you work with people. It gets messy, and that's to be expected working with humans, like, and relationships. It does get messy. But I think, especially, again, these issues existed pre-pandemic, but I think they've been exacerbated since, like the idea of, I feel like, for teachers feeling like, like, we're disposable, um, that there's no trust in terms of us being able to do our jobs and do them well. Like, I feel, especially like within the district that I work, I don't want to be like, not my school out, but like the district where I work, I feel is very micromanaged in terms of like, not trusting the teachers that they have in the district to really kind of depend on them to do the job that we've been trained to do. Like, I feel like, and I think that kind of makes sense across the board. Just a lot of higher ups are kind of placing their hand over us and kind of saying, like, we don't want you to like go off the script, so to speak, in terms of what you teach. You want to teach this way. And so for me, obviously, for me, like being a teacher, but also being, on the left, and for me, the idea of teaching, revolution, the idea of trying to have children be empowered to, like own their learning, but also realize that your learning is not just for you. Your learning is to empower others. Your learning is meant to engage, especially given in politics, and engage in a way that pushes, our country forward. You know, I don't think we do that. And, like, and I feel right now there's kind of like this hold to prevent that from, well, it makes sense. You can't have, you know, the populace who is, aware. You can't have that because
Can't have that.
that's bad for corporations, that's
Right.
bad for the banks, like that's just, they can't have that. So it's just like this overarching like hold that capitalism has. I feel personally, for me, like I feel that every day, like that I can't teach fully in a way that I really want to. I think that's the hardest for me, in terms of like starting to know the truth. And I can give some glimmers of that here and there, to my students, but I can't really do it in a way that I think would be very, you know, like fulfilling, in a sense of really fully realizing the potential of what they should be doing and how they should be using their education, to push, forward in terms of like, I would say, defeating capitalism and defeating imperialism and defeating all the isms, that are on hold in this world and especially in this country. Like, I just feel like there's a a certain effort to kind of prevent like children slash young adults to really fully realize themselves into that. Um, so yeah, I think for me that's the hardest thing, especially, especially being in this, and doing, and just having the opportunities I have. It's just like I can't necessarily take a lot of those ideas, especially from INN, into the classroom, if that makes any sense.
Well, yeah, and it's especially difficult too when you care about these kids so much too. You know,
Yeah.
I don't have kids, but that don't mean I don't like kids and I don't want them to have a good future. Because that's the way I was brought up when I was a kid. The elders that I knew did what they could to make sure that my generation could thrive. Little did they know
Yeah.
that Gen X was going to be fucked over as bad as they were. But some of them gave it a shot. But
Yeah.
I do remember 25 years ago I actually dated a teacher, and she had, and she taught. I think she taught preschool. I think she taught preschool
Mhm.
kids, and same thing. You know, she just loved those kids to death. But if she, I don't know if she still teaches or not. I haven't kept up with her. But if she's still teaching now, I really feel sorry for her because you know the shit that like you said, like I think um I think it was said best by somebody in the chat. Overworked, underpaid, you
Yeah,
know, classroom sizes just through the roof. Oh,
yeah,
Anthony, yeah, class size is too
yeah,
big, and that's
yeah.
the way it was started getting that way.
That's just the surface.